They call it a virtue. They praise your maturity, your calmness, and your uncanny ability to handle the weight of the world while others were still learning to play. But what if your strength is actually a crime scene? What if the responsible adult you are today is merely a ghost haunting the child you were never allowed to be? Why does the sound of laughter sometimes feel like a foreign language to you? And whose life have you been living all these years, if your own was traded for someone else's survival? Today, we are going to exhume the buried childhood of the little adult. We are going to find out why you grew up so and what exactly died in the process. The parentified soul, the silent theft of the internal sandbox, a playground. The air is filled with the chaotic, beautiful aimlessness of childhood. But in the corner, there is a child sitting perfectly still. Their eyes aren't on the ball or the slide. They are fixed on the adults. They are watching the tension in a father's jaw or the trembling of a mother's hand. While other children are learning how to fall, this child is learning how to catch. Does this image feel less like a memory and more like a mirror? We often praise the mature child. We tell them they are a little soul, an old head on young shoulders. But in the quiet halls of psychology, we call this the parentified soul. It is a silent theft. It is the moment the internal sandbox, that sacred space of play, mass mistakes, is paved over to build a fortress. When a home becomes unstable, whether through addiction, trauma, or emotional frailty, the roles do not simply shift, they invert. The nursery is dismantled and replaced by a courtroom or a psychiatric ward. And you were appointed the judge, the nurse, and the mediator before you were old enough to understand the gravity of the gavel. Why did you feel it was your job to keep the peace? This is the golden child trap. You discovered, with a chilling clarity, that value was not tied to who you were, but to how useful you could be. Love was not a birthright. It was a wage earned by managing the emotions of those who were supposed to manage yours. You became a mirror, reflecting back exactly what the adults needed to see to keep them from falling apart. But look at the cost of this utility. To be useful, you had to disappear. You developed a false self, a polished, hyper-vigilant mask that never slips. You learned to scan the room for danger before you even knew your own name. You became an expert at reading the micro shifts in a parent's breathing. It is a paradox of survival. You grew tall so that others wouldn't have to reach. But a tree that grows too fast in shallow soil develops a hollow core. Even now, years later, your nervous system is still on duty. You are a soldier in a war that ended decades ago. Why is it that even in moments of absolute safety, your heart beats with a subtle rhythmic dread? Why do you feel guilty the moment you stop being productive? It is because your body is still waiting for the disaster that has already happened. You are trapped in a loop of vigilance, convinced if you stop watching the horizon, the world will collapse. You have forgotten how to be useless. And in this world, uselessness is the highest luxury of the child. But what happens to the grief that was never cried? Where does the anger go, the anger of a child who was forced to be an anchor for a ship that refused to sail? We have lived so long in the service of others that the idea of a true self feels like a ghost story. We have mastered the art of survival, but we have neglected the art of living. The fortress you built is strong. It has kept you safe. It has made you successful. But the walls are thick, and the air inside is growing stale. We have identified the theft. We have seen the architect of your vigilance, but have yet to look at the funeral. Because to move forward, we must acknowledge that something in you didn't just grow up. Something in was buried alive. And as we descend into the deeper layers of this silence, we must confront the most difficult question of all. How do you mourn someone who is still walking around in your skin? The vigil is almost over. The shadow is starting to speak. The mourning of the living, existential grief for the unlived life. There is a peculiar kind of sorrow that's no grave. It doesn't smell of incense or lilies, but of old calendars and untouched toys. It is the grief of the living for the self that never got to exist. Philosophers like Kierkegaard spoke of despair as a sickness of the spirit, a failure to be oneself. But for you, the paradox is deeper. You didn't fail to be yourself. You were never given the permission to begin. To grow up too fast is to attend your own funeral before you have even learned to walk. Why is it that your successes feel like tributes to a stranger? Why does the weight of your responsibility feel less like choice and more like a life sentence? Carl Jung suggested that the child within is not just a poetic metaphor, but a vital psychological organ. It is the source of spontaneity, play, and raw, unedited life. When you were forced to become the anchor for your family, that organ was cauterized. You traded your play for protection. You traded your curiosity for competence. In doing so, you committed a tragic act of internal sacrifice. You buried the child in a shallow grave made of shoulds and musts, and you stood over it as a stern, tireless sentry. This hyper-responsibility you carry today, is it truly a virtue? Or is it sophisticated defense against the terrifying realization of human fragility? If you are always the one who is fine, if you are the one who solves every problem, anticipates every disaster, you don't have to face the truth that life is fundamentally uncontrollable. Your maturity is a shield. By acting like a god in your own small world, you protect yourself from the vulnerability of being human. You have become a monument of granite to avoid being a creature of flesh. But granite cannot feel the sun. Granite cannot weep. We think of healing as moving on. We think of it as getting better at being an adult. But what if the cure is the very thing you fear the most? What if the path to wholeness requires you to become, in the eyes of the world, useless? To the parentified soul, uselessness is a form of death. Your entire identity is built on being the one who is needed. To sit still, to want something for no reason, to play without a goal, these acts feel like a betrayal of the fortress. They feel like a sin. But Kierkegaard might argue that until you embrace the absurdity of your own needs, you are merely a shadow. Can you hear it? Beneath the floorboards of your accomplishments, there is a scratching. It is the child you buried, still breathing, still waiting. They don't want your money, titles, or your stoicism. They want to be allowed to fail. They want to be allowed to be small. Healing is not a promotion to a higher level of maturity. It is a radical descent. It is the act of walking back to that shallow grave and digging with your bare hands. It is about letting the useless child speak from the cracks in your competence. It is about admitting that the anchor tired of holding the ship. But here is the final, unsettling doubt. If you let the child out, who will keep the world from falling apart? If you stop being the responsible one, will there be anything left of you at all? We have explored the theft, and we have stood at the funeral. We have looked at the cost of your strength. But we have yet to the most dangerous transition. Because once you stop being the hero of everyone else's story, you are left with the silence of your own. The weight is beginning to shift. The mask is starting to crack. And what lies behind the mask is not what you expected.